passenger trains. They carry a lot of people. But what if you needed to carry, well, not a lot of people? That was typically the case with branch lines, routes that branch off the main line and typically serve smaller communities and local businesses. While they did bring in profit, there was still the sizable expense of operating a steam locomotive in some number of coaches. American railroads needed a more economical way of operating these shorter trains. So in came the concept of combining a passenger car and a locomotive together to create a self-propelled railcar. Pioneering designs like the steam motor car and McKean motor car weren't very popular as they had their own myriad of issues. Improvements to the internal combustion engine in the 1910s and 20s led to the successful Doodlebug, a name that was not given affectionately. Critics viewed this gas or diesel-powered contraption as something that couldn't do much but dilly-dally or doodle down the track at slow speeds. Naysayers were proven wrong as compared to steam locomotives. The railcars were cheaper in branchline service and could tow along an additional coach if necessary. However, railroads were known to misuse them and often tried to pull too many cars despite the lack of horsepower. In the early 1930s, a newcomer poked their head into the rail equipment business. It was the Budd Company, who tried their hand at rail cars using rubber tires of all things. They were powered by gas or diesel motors and sported a lightweight and streamlined stainless steel body design that Budd would become famous for. The flanged rubber tires were supposed to provide a more comfortable ride and additional traction, but in the end these cars ended up bouncing around and derailing a lot. Budd wasn't ready to give up just yet though. By 1941, diesel technology had improved and the Prospector diesel multiple unit train was introduced. It took passengers on a scenic journey between Denver, Colorado and Salt Lake City, Utah, hosting coach and sleeper accommodations. Only thing was, the rugged terrain and steep gradients took their toll on the underpowered railcars, leading to frequent breakdowns and ultimately being discontinued in 1942. After World War II, wartime restrictions on gasoline and automobile usage were lifted, and Americans flocked to their cars once again. And as a result, commuter and branchline services were seeing fewer passengers, and state governments weren't too keen on letting railroads discontinue their trains. At the time, railroads were kind of expected to host some kind of passenger service, no matter how minimal it might be. The railroads needed a reliable and cheap power source to cut their losses. Oh, hey, it's the Budd Company again. And they've got something for us? RDC. Let's see what this is all about. By the late 1940s, Budd had plenty of experience under their belt, having built over 2,500 passenger cars, and was ready to revisit the railcar idea. Rail Diesel Car, or RDC, was their new project name.
A car of stainless steel which is its own train, carrying its own power, self-contained.
It was designed to reduce operating costs on branchline passenger trains. Using a standard 85-foot-long coach as a base, Budd's iconic stainless steel fluting design was applied with a hump on top to house the radiators. They gave it a pair of 275 horsepower 6-cylinder Detroit Diesel Series 110 engines that operated independently, so if one broke down, the RDC could still move using the other engine. Axles were driven by a hydraulic torque converter derived from the M46 Patton tank, and the cars were rated for a top speed of 85 miles per hour. A cabin control stand were located at both ends, negating the need to turn around, and RDCs could operate as a DMU set for increased capacity. The RDC-1 model made its debut at Chicago's Union Station in September 1949, with an optimistic marketing campaign following suit. Budd boasted that, "The RDC-1 seats 90 in air-conditioned comfort. With power transmitted hydraulically, from an effortless start it picks up speed like a whippet and stops in fantastically short space, with the easy softness of pushing your hand against a pillow." Additional tests across the country proved the RDC could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in a brisk 2 minutes, and start from a standstill on the steepest hills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. The New York Central was the first to place an order, putting 2 cars into service between Boston and Springfield, Massachusetts in 1950. And with time, railroads warmed up to the RDC and orders steadily rolled in, with exports going to Australia, Brazil, Canada, Cuba, and Saudi Arabia. Variations of the railcar included the RDC-2, 3, 4, 5, and 9, each of them differing in passenger, mail, and baggage capacity. Northeastern railroads often found them useful for commuter service, while others used them on lesser traveled routes. With their appealing design, ease of maintenance, comfort, flexibility, and economical nature, they were proving to be quite the success.
Spur lines abandoned because of the pressure of economics have reopened. Rights of way, which for years have seen only an occasional local freight, are busy again. Better service, new jobs.
1956 saw the release of a slightly altered version of the RDC featuring 25 extra horsepower, smaller cab windows, and the fluting now wrapping around the cabs. In the following year, the New Haven Railroad introduced the 6-car Roger Williams RDC train, named after the man who established the colony of Providence in present-day Rhode Island. It was to be an experimental and lightweight higher-speed train. There was a bulldog nose cab on each end to improve aerodynamics, each car was 6 inches shorter to lower the center of gravity, new interiors, a third rail shoe was added to operate through Grand Central Terminal, and 110 miles per hour was the new top speed. Crews favored the more conventional cab design, but running the train on third rail power proved troublesome. So after only a year and a half, the set was split up and the control cars went to work with the rest of the New Haven's RDCs. Bad news for the railcar started brewing in the form of the Transportation Act of 1958. Railroads were still struggling to boost passenger numbers, especially on secondary lines, so this act allowed a bit more leniency in discontinuing their money-losing trains. In other words, the RDC was about to be out of a job sooner than later. Production ceased in 1962 at a total of 398 cars. Meanwhile, in Canada, the story was a bit more optimistic. You could still find the RDC moving local people and parcels along the waters of Nova Scotia, the urban sprawl of Ontario, the fields of Saskatchewan, and the mountains of British Columbia. Canadian National modernized their impressive fleet in 1964-65 by adding a new headlight, refurbished interior, and a diaphragm so passengers could walk between cars. Let's go back to the US in 1966. The New York Central had the crazy idea of strapping 2 jet engines onto an RDC to make a cheap high-speed train that nearly reached 200 miles an hour. If you want to learn more about that, check out this video I made on it here. As the American highway system blossomed rapidly, passenger trains were getting canceled left and right, and railroads were kinda left to rot in a cold-shouldered state. Despite the forlorn atmosphere, the plucky little RDC could still be found scooting up and down the rails. After the government finally stepped in and created Amtrak to take over most of the nation's passenger rail service in 1971, and there was drastic restructuring of commuter rail operators in the Northeast, the RDC found a new lease on life in the region. Commuter rail operators found them quite useful, and Amtrak used them, but to a lesser extent. Meanwhile, Budd was looking to the future and introduced a successor to the RDC with the SPV-2000 in 1978. Like the RDC, it could be operated independently or as a DMU set. They utilized the newer Amfleet body and were powered by a 360 horsepower Detroit diesel engine with the intention of reaching 120 miles per hour in commuter or intercity service. 31 cars were produced by 1981, with an additional 14 left unfinished. 4 operators rostered them, with the Connecticut Department of Transportation and Metropolitan Transportation Authority owning the most. Fortunately, the SPV was actually quite successful, running with little to no issue except I'm just kidding! Look at you getting trolled, you goofy goober, I ought to take you down to Weenie Hut Juniors. The SPV was actually quite the mechanical headache. Here's a forum post where someone explains the specifics, but simply put, wheel slip, electronic failures, and breakdowns were caused by underpowered axles and the lack of an alternator. Subsequently, the SPVs were converted into coaches on Condat in 1994, replaced by Mafersa cars in 2008, and finally sold off to the Foxville and Northern Railroad in 2018. Metro North stored their cars away in the 90s, with one preserved at the Connecticut Eastern Railroad Museum. Unfortunately for the Budd Company, this flopped further the company's decline, producing their last railcar in 1987 and then going bankrupt in 2014. As for the RDCs, Revenue service around the world had for the most part ceased around the 1980s and 90s as newer equipment rolled in. Many were converted to standard coaches, put in storage, or scrapped. A few lucky survivors continued running on BC Rail until 2002, the Alaska Railroad in 2008, and Trinity Railway Express in 2011. Today, the railed diesel car can still be seen on display or running excursions at museums and on CN, Via Rail, and the West Side Express service. The RDC was the Budd Company's answer to American railroads needing a more economical way of running shorter branch line passenger trains, especially in a time when highways were eating away at their business. Even if the RDCs couldn't change the fate of passenger trains in America, they still did their job well. Compared to Europe and Asia, diesel railcars and DMUs were, and still are, a bit of a rarity for the US and Canada. Could Amtrak and Via Rail branch into more rural markets if they used an updated RDC or DMU? What do you think? Regardless, the RDC's reliability, flexibility, and cost-effectiveness permitted them a prosperous career lasting over 70 years. Thank you to my channel members. Special thanks to Mooter, Tommy Rosini, Grand Canyon Studios, Evans DFW Railfan Productions, the Oklahoma Hot Rail, Amtrak Fan 19, Gojira's Trains, Dawson Seward, Neural Soap, Aaron Forestry YT, and Axel Proto for subscribing to the Conductor tier. Your extra support always means and helps me out a lot. Seriously, it does. I'd also like to thank those who send in their own pictures and videos for me to use here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.